Good morning. Good morning and welcome to St. Louis. It's my great pleasure to have you join us at the Research Summit here in this beautiful space that they call inhabitants. And I want to thank the host of this summit in this building, Dean Ann Taylor. Dean, thank you for your support. And thank you for the wonderful spread for breakfast. It was really good. Cheese for breakfast. I love it. Thank you. I also want to thank the four vice chancellors at the four universities and their supporters at the four universities for organizing today's event. But I do want to thank the local host, Chris Billing. Chris, thank you for your work. Also, this summit has received strong support, and that support came from our interim chancellor and provost, Kristen Sobolik. Kristen, thank you. You're going to be up speaking after me. And I understand that this entire day has been organized and implemented with the hard work of Laura Blevin and her team at UMSO. And thank you, they're over there, and they're going to make sure that all of our needs are met so we have a successful summit going forward. So these summits have served a very useful purpose to elevate the discussion for collaborative research across the four universities. And even though each presentation is short in time, they create a lot of interest among the faculty members and other participants to think about how the links to our own research can be met. And so we are going to continue these events by picking themes that are related to grand challenge themes that we should be working on as a system of four research universities. So I'm very pleased to see all of you here in St. Louis, and I look forward to a terrific day. With that, let me introduce the next speaker, Dr. Kristen Sobolik.
So thank you, President Choi, and I want to reiterate his welcome to our great facility here and a wonderful day. And if it's going to be a sunny day and we have to be indoors, it needs to be in the EDCO habitat so we can actually see that sun. So welcome to the University of Missouri-St. Louis. We are really pleased to host you for, I think this is the fifth, or maybe the sixth, I think, Research Summit, all on different wide-scale or broad-scale themes that can showcase the research that's going on across the University of Missouri system, but with the ultimate intent to make connections so that you understand and can make connections across the system and collaborate so our impact can be greater. Now, President Choi had indicated that the research summits need to be on kind of a grandiose topic, a topic that's important for Missouri, but also for the world. And I think this particular topic today definitely fits that bill. These are the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. There are 17 of them, and these are global goals that were adopted by the United Nations membership in 2015. So these are global goals that we're all working on collectively. Goals that will, if achieved, impact not only Missouri, but of course the rest of the world. These SDGs are a universal call to action to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure all people enjoy peace and prosperity. And I can't think of better goals that we would want to showcase that we do here at the University of Missouri, all across the entire system, creating collaborative partnerships that can really enhance global goals. So I'm pleased to welcome you here, and we have a lot of excellent speakers and experts to talk on these goals. So I will hand it off to one of our hosts, for apparently there are two, Ann Taylor in this room, but I'm going to hand this off to Vice Provost Chris Spilling to talk about and moderate our sessions. Chris.
Before Dr. Spilling comes up to begin the summit, I want to share with you an exciting news item in that we are going to be launching a call for proposals in Tier 3. You may recall back in the fall of 2018, we launched the Tier 1 and Tier 2 projects to support the strategic plan investments at the 4 universities. Now the Tier 3 projects are going to support those that focus on the arts, humanities, social sciences, and behavioral sciences to elevate the university's collaboration and increase research and creative works. And this project will support projects that are level of up to $75,000. It will have to have a requirement of a 25% cost share, usually from department, deans, or the provost office to support those projects. And we encourage collaboration. Collaborations are not required, but meaningful collaborations within the campus and across the campuses are strongly encouraged. These projects, the proposals for these projects will be due on February 25th, so about 3 months from now. In addition to topics in broad areas of arts, humanities, social, and behavioral sciences, we are also seeking proposals that support the next-gen priorities in precision health by looking at the economic, social, behavioral, and the ethical implementation of precision health. Currently, we are thinking that the funding of $1 million will be broken down to general projects of about $800,000 and projects that support precision health at $200,000. But those that boundary between general and precision health is not fixed in stone. And I do want to thank the individuals across the 4 campuses, led by Cooper Jury, who came together to develop the concepts for the Tier 3 proposals and will develop the RFP. RFP will be released, I believe, sometime this week. And in addition to the RFP, by the middle of December, we will share with the community a renewed, refreshed vision for next-gen precision health that identifies the definition of precision health, because it's a very broad term, and the definitions of precision health that applies to our universities, where we believe there are strengths. And so please wait for that, but we encourage all of you to speak to your colleagues and start thinking about projects that you can propose for this competition. So thank you, and we look forward to a great day of talks and discussions. And now here is Chris Billing. Chris?
Well, thanks to President Choi for that wonderful announcement. I'm sure this is the right audience to listen to that. So I definitely encourage all the UMSL faculty to apply. A couple of housekeeping things. I also need to thank my team in the Office of Research for their help on putting this day together. And Jeff Sussman, who's sitting behind the screen here from the Columbia campus, who's been invaluable in helping with the programming, collecting all the names, putting the program together. A couple of housekeeping things. We have 4 sessions, 2 this morning and 2 this afternoon. We're going to have a break in the middle for lunch, and lunch will be at the tables at the back there, so that will arrive sometime during the morning session. We have coffee and breakfast snacks over in the corner. Feel free to get up and get those between the talks. There will be no questions in the talks, but after each group is given their presentations, they're going to come back up to the stage and answer questions as a group. So we have a short Q&A session. For the speakers, the talks are limited to 5 minutes. Monica here, stand up, Monica. She's my timekeeper. She's an accountant, so she's very strict on numbers. She will give you the 1-minute warning and then the stop, get off the stage, go away warning. So try to stick to time if you can. We actually have 8 minutes per speaker, but that's to allow for turnover and introductions and so on. So, without further ado, it's time to get on with the first session of the morning. And I'd like to call up, let's see, Shay Kirkhoff, who's Assistant Professor in the College of Education in UMSL. And that's the title of her presentation. Do you need a laser? Clicker is... It's supposed to be this. That's the clicker.
Thank you, President Choi, Provost and Interim Chancellor Sobolik, and Vice Provost Phil. My name is Shay Kirkhoff, and today I'm going to be talking to you about teaching global citizenship through inquiry in a rural junior high school. First, let's talk about why teaching global citizenship education is important. So the U.S. is globally connected. Technologically and socially, there's over 2.7 billion Facebook users globally. We're also connected environmentally and economically. In addition, the US is globally diverse. We are home to people from all over the world, including Asia and Africa, as well as Europe and the Americas. The challenge is for all students to graduate global ready, and this challenge has been put forth by the U.S. Department of Education as well as the OECD. So what does that mean? Global ready means the multiliteracies needed in the 21st century to collaborate, participate, and work with anyone, anywhere in the world. In order to do this, we need to teach students about the world in a sophisticated way. The research I'm presenting today is part of a qualitative collective case study that took place in a Midwestern community in rural Indiana. This is a photo of the area where I was. It was a small school, 7th through 12th grade, totaled 315 students. And I worked closely with the 7th and 8th grade team that consisted of English, mathematics, science, social studies, special education, and 2 paraprofessionals, as well as the 100 students. We worked together on a semester-long project, and it was a project on SDG 2, Zero Hunger. The data for the project included, or for the research included, observation notes of the project over the semester, student learning products, and interviews with 5 teachers. Now, before I get to that slide, when I analyzed this data, we were able to debunk 5 myths about global citizenship education. Myth number 1, global citizenship is taught in social studies and world language classes. That is not true. In reality, global learning may not be being taught in world languages and social studies to the extent that our students need in order to collaborate in interdisciplinary ways that we need in order to solve the SDGs. So here are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And all of these are transdisciplinary in nature. Myth number 2, global education means talking about food and flags. No. In reality, global citizenship means including heritage and international cultures beyond the surface levels. This includes communication styles and approaches to problem solving. It also involves helping students develop empathy across difference. Myth number 3, global education is important in places like Europe and New York City, but not in the Midwest. Again, not true. This infographic points to how international the Midwest is as far as jobs. So you can see Illinois and Minnesota have a lot of international jobs, and if we zoom in on Missouri, where we are here, 1 in 5 jobs are tied to international trade. But it's not just about careers and jobs. There's also been a 51% increase in the foreign-born population. Myth number 4. Global citizenship education is something extra I have to do as a teacher. The reality is that global teaching is showing students how they are already globally connected and how the curriculum is already globally connected. This is what I talked to the junior high students about. Before they even left for school, they might have hit their alarm clock that was made in China, put on their shirt made in Bangladesh, their shoes from Vietnam, grabbed a banana that was grown in Panama before they even headed out the door to school. Myth number 5. Global education means telling students what to think politically. No. It's about not miseducating our students. If we teach our students from an ethnocentric or American-centric view, then they're getting a distorted view of the world and perhaps an inflated sense of America's place in the world. This is an example of the true size map, which shows how when we have been taught in our classes about the 3D globe and it's put onto a 2D plane in our textbooks, it shows that the United States and China are bigger than they actually are, and it shows that Africa is smaller than they actually are. And I like this quote that sums it up. According to Kogan and Kubo, the aim in developing a global perspective is to expand and enrich students' perspectives so that their views of the world are not ethnocentric, stereotypical, or otherwise limited by a narrow or distorted point of view. If we neglect to nurture a global perspective, students are likely to continue viewing the world narrowly through the lenses of their own interests, location, and culture. As Maya Angelou said, we are obliged to know we are citizens of the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Shay. So our next speaker is also from the College of Education at Amstel, Jennifer Bumble. And this is the title of Jennifer's talk. Please come up. While Jennifer's talking, I want to point out that we have on the tables of lunch, we put together funding opportunities based on these sustainable goals. So as you talk over lunch, you've got some information about where to go for funding for this kind of research.
Good morning. Today I'm going to be talking with you about community-based approaches to improving the post-school outcomes of young people with disabilities. But to do that, hopefully I can work this clicker. It's interesting. Oh no, that was wrong. All right, don't count this against my minutes. All right, first, we have to transport ourselves back to high school, all right? Now, if you're like me, you might be having some flashbacks, maybe to big hair, questionable fashion trends, but stick with me and consider this question. What were you looking forward to most after graduation? Now, if you're like most young people, it was probably something like getting out of your parents' house, getting a new car, a better job, hanging out with your friends, or going to college. And for those of you who have spent any time with young people with disabilities, you know that they share these same hopes and dreams for life after high school. Because we know that disability labels are not a predictor of someone's dreams. Far too often they become a predictor of their outcomes. And that leads to some pretty disappointing statistics for young people with disabilities across integrated employment, post-secondary education, and independent living. Now, one way I work to improve those outcomes is through collaboration. So this is a typical model of collaboration for a student that is transitioning from the school system to the community. And you can see that there are schools and families and disability partners all working together to support this young person as they transition to life in the community. But when I look at this model, I see one very large group of potential partners that are missing, and that is community partners. Because in every community, there are a whole host of individuals who have unique resources and knowledge to share and contribute to this transition process. And that's people like employers and faith community leaders, the owner of the EMOs, the mayor, neighbors who don't know a lot about disability, but are really excited to get in and help if you can just tell them where to plug in. So imagine the possibilities if we start to bring all of these partners to the table, to start to reimagine what this transition process might look like to create more inclusive communities. But to do this, we need a new approach. We need an approach that is focused on getting new partners and perspectives to the table. Because if we keep bringing the same people to the table, we keep getting the same solutions, and we know that something isn't working there. We need a new approach that is asset-based and that isn't focused on top-down systems change, but community-informed systems change that is rooted in the strengths and culture and priorities of individual communities. We need an approach that is flexible and that brings into the equation the voices of those most impacted by community issues. And I just so happen to have an approach to share with you today that meets all of these criteria that I use in my own research, and that is community conversations. So community conversations are a variation of the World Cafe, and they are 2-hour events that are asset-based approaches to bringing together a wide cross-section of community members with different experiences and different backgrounds that can all brainstorm solutions to a community's most pressing issues. Now, for me, these issues focus around people with disabilities and their families, but they can be applied to any community concern. They're 2-hour events, and they have a series of small and whole group discussions. And there are note takers at every table that are recording all of the ideas that start to bubble up during those 2 hours. So you can imagine that these are really rich sources of data. So not only do you have the conversations and the ideas during that 2 hours, but you can collect a lot of data before and after the event. So surveys, pre-post measures, interviews, focus groups, field notes, observations, all of these contribute to a really rich collection of data that you can then share back to the community to help them launch sustainable community change. Now, in the last few years, I guess my font wasn't on that computer. In the last few years, I've hosted 39 community conversations with state partners and individual communities. They've brought together over 2,000 attendees who have generated more than 7,500 unique ideas to increase integrated employment, facilitate community inclusion in faith community groups, create post-secondary education programs, and facilitate the independent living of individuals with disabilities in the community. They've also contributed to some really substantial systems change efforts, which I'll have to talk to you about at lunch. And recently I've been also looking at the methodology, so conducting a literature review to look at how the World Cafe has been applied to disability issues, not just within special education, but medicine, social work, counseling, religious studies, and starting to identify what the quality indicators are for researchers who are undertaking this approach to tackle disability issues. Now, I've found using this approach in my own research really rewarding. It has shown me the power of community. And so I hope that some of you are thinking now, how might I use this in my own research, or how might I use this in my own community? Or what on earth has she been talking about the last 5 minutes? If any of those are the case, I would love to connect with you today during the event or during lunch, and I thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Jennifer. So our next speaker is from Missouri S&T, from the Department of Teacher Education and Certification, Beth Kaney-Ogochi, and this is the title of her talk. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know what you're thinking. I didn't know they had teacher education at S&T. Yes, we do, and I am the founding chair. Ask me about it at lunch. We have about 115 students in our program. We only have undergrad program. About half of those students come from rural school districts, typically in the south central region of the state, and they want to go back to their hometown and teach. And that makes them really important to our state. Because in our state, we have a shortage of qualified teachers, in part because of how much we pay teachers. How much, education people, you are not allowed to answer, okay? How much are we legislated to pay beginning teachers in the state of Missouri? $75,000. No. No. Another guess. 35. Too high. $25,000. When I started teaching, and I taught in a rural school district, when I started teaching almost 20 years ago, I made $27,000, if that tells you anything. $25,000. And you may be thinking, well, why don't they just pay those teachers more? Part of the issue in a rural school district, so I'm giving you some context here of the challenges and just the differences of being in that environment. Part of the challenge in a rural school district is it takes sometimes over half of their entire budget just to get the kids to walk through the door in the morning because of how spread out geographically the district is. And they have to run buses and they have to get the kids to school. So that takes quite a bit of time. The kids are on the buses for a long time sometimes, and it just takes a lot of resources. And so the money is just not there sometimes to pay the teachers more. And not just about the teachers, so when we look at STEM education, the facilities, the labs, microscopes, just the equipment may not be there in those school districts. And this is not unique to Missouri, the teacher shortage. However, we pay our teachers about 48, we're 48th out of 50 in terms of beginning teacher salary. And thus we're having a shortage. There's some debate about that, about whether we should call it a shortage. But in rural school districts in particular, this has hit them very hard. Anyone want to guess what is the #1 area where we are short in the state of Missouri? Maybe thinking like physics, chemistry, like that's what you're thinking, right? No, it's actually elementary. Over 300 jobs were vacant or filled by an unqualified applicant last year across the whole state, 300 elementary. And we produce a lot of elementary teachers in the state, but they don't always want to go where the jobs are. They don't always want to go to the little rural school district. In fact, most of the time they do not, because they get paid $25,000. So the students who come from those communities and want to go back are so important. Some other unique challenges, so I am new, you probably saw. I've been in my position since July. However, I grew up in a rural school district. I'm a product of a rural school district, and I taught in a rural school district. So this is a very personal topic to me. So I have been going out and meeting with superintendents and going to schools and starting partnerships. And just a unique challenge that I feel like everyone should know is this does not work to tell you where to go because there is no cell signal in many of these places. I was at a school on Tuesday, no cell signal in the building. So you just think about how reliant we are on this and how different it is to communicate literally in a school district where there's no cell signal. And there may not be internet access, or there may not be enough broadband to put all the Chromebooks on the Wi-Fi. You just have to be really creative when you work in these schools. And when we go into these schools, my students, because that's where most of our field experiences are, we have to be creative too, and we have to know each of the schools where we go and what the resources are and what the community is like. And that's really important so that when we go in, we can work with the teachers and not just come in and be a disruption. So some of the things that we are starting to do, and so I'm new and this is sort of little baby research, but we are going into the schools. We went on Halloween, which if you're a teacher is like the worst classroom management day ever, okay? The kids have a lot of sugar, they want to wear costumes, like, whew. My class, we taught the entire elementary school 1 grade level at a time. We did STEM lessons that my students designed specifically for that community after researching the community, and we talked with the principal. They were doing no STEM in this elementary, none. And I just want to be clear, STEM does not mean teaching math. So if you're doing math worksheets and if you're giving tests, you are not teaching STEM. STEM is a different way of teaching. Talk to me about it at lunch if you don't know what I mean. So they were doing no STEM. This is from the principal. They were doing no STEM in this elementary school. We came in for our class, and we, side by side with the teachers, we were doing STEM lessons. And we had 60 kids in a cafeteria, like the entire 5th grade was there. It was all hands on deck, teaching side by side with the teachers in the rural districts with some of the equipment that we brought with us. So the teachers had firsthand knowledge of how to use it. My students got some great experience. They were totally exhausted when they went home. They were like, when do I go to the bathroom? I'm like, right now, kids are coming in 3 minutes, you better go. So it was a great experience for them. But that's what we're doing at S&T. We're also having some field trips tomorrow. We'll have second graders there. So little baby research about what's going on in rural schools in Missouri. Thank you.
Thank you. My wife grew up in a rural school district, and so I'm familiar with some of those stories of hours on the bus. But our next speaker is also from the College of Education again at UMSL, Amber Candela, and she's going to be talking about
mathematics, everyone's favorite topic. All right, I'm not used to standing in one place if you know me, so here we go. Let's see how this works. All right, so I want to start off this morning with a little bit of a survey, if you will. So I'm curious, how does mathematics make you feel? So just raise your hand in the air. How many does mathematics give you fear? All right, what about disgust? Sadness? Anger? Joy? Perfect. All right. So what I'm trying to understand is how are we bringing more students to experience joy and curiosity in mathematics? Because when I tell people what I do, math education, I oftentimes hear, math. That was my least favorite subject, and what are you doing? Followed by, Common Core. I don't understand why math is even new. So it was even in the Incredibles movie, new math, what is this new math? So I'm here to talk about how what I believe is tasks and what we put in front of students is the most important decision a teacher makes, because it actually helps students think about what their feelings are about mathematics and shapes how they feel about math. And if we want more students to go into STEM-related fields, then they need to find joy in mathematics and not have it, beaten out of them. So what do I mean by this? My framework that follows tasks is the first thing. The first thing that we think about is what it is that we're putting in front of students. So sometimes we put things in front of students and they're like, wait, I don't understand. How does 60 cantaloupes have anything to do with a math problem? And here we are trying to connect math and real world life, and they don't understand what we're doing. We also have this thing where we're like, here you go, here's a worksheet, hang by yourself for 50 minutes and complete all of these problems. Again, not creating any joy. Then we put problems in front of students and we really want them to be curious and have these awesome solutions. And when they come up with them, like Calvin here, we say, oh, you know what, forget about that, let's just worry about the mathematics, and we take that curiosity out of them. So what can we do? What we think about, and there's many names for this, high cognitive demand, cognitively demanding, my friend over the weekend called them juicy tasks, but how are we putting tasks in front of students that create these opportunities for anyone to come in? So we want to change the way that we view what mathematics is. Instead of there being one answer, how can we think about how we can increase participation? So instead of saying, what is 8 plus 5? Instead turning it around and saying something like, can you find me numbers that sum to 12? There's more than one way. Kids can get creative. Anyone has access into this problem, and there's ways of seeing mathematics that's not just, I'm gonna wait for that one kid to raise their hand, they're gonna get the answer, the teacher's gonna move on. So what does this mean though? That sounds great, but then I hear from teachers, well, what about these students? What about the students who struggle? What about my ELL student, English language learners? What about my students with disabilities? And I say, let's forget about all of that and let's presume the competence of students. Every student comes in with some sort of mathematical ability, and it's up to us to think about how do we leverage what they know and build that up from there. So reform efforts and all these people are calling for more mathematics, more mathematics. But what happens is students identified as ones who struggle or with disabilities are pulled out of the classroom and they only get to see mathematics as one way, and that is skill. So we're trying to figure out how we can shape instruction so that we're allowing all of our students entry into it without killing the cognitive demand of tasks. So what does that mean? I focus on implementation. I focus on what does the teacher do in the classroom, because that is what matters. and really thinking about teachers can implement. I could give all of you guys the same juicy task and you could all implement it in a different way. And we don't want kids like this. Math is when you subtract numbers and the teacher will make sure you have the right answer. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to create more kids like Foxtrot. I don't know if you follow him, he's one of my favorites, but he loves mathematics. Mathematics exists in the world. I see everything with mathematics, and that is what we are trying to get teachers to do. So how do we do that? Well, the other problem is we also have this other deficit framing. What about new teachers? What about teachers who are alternatively certified? What about teachers in here or there? So we also need to presume the competence of our teachers. How are we having asset-based professional development coming in and saying, especially with elementary teachers, we know that you teach things well. What are you most confident and comfortable with teaching? And let's build on that so that you can teach it with mathematics. So what I do is I use some rubrics. You can talk to me at lunch about the rubrics that I use to think about how we create professional development opportunities for teachers to really use what they do best in order to support their instruction. So I created an intervention cycle. A lot of it includes feedback to teachers and really doing these small coaching moves so we can move in little steps. And what we found is that through time, teachers were able to make one small step forward in whatever it was they were doing, whether it was just getting a better task, whether it was increasing student discussion, whether it was increasing the rigor of their questions. And so this is what I found so far. In a year, I can make small steps happen. But what I really want to do is figure out how can I create this journey so that they can move on from there. So I'm trying to think about how can I focus on students, how can I integrate more live coaching, and how can I scale this up? Because I've been in 2 schools, and I really want to bring this to the community at large because all of our students and all of our teachers need this. So thank you so much, and seeing how we can connect joy and mathematics.
So if I can ask the speakers to come up and we have a microphone in the middle aisle. If you'd like to ask questions of the panel, please use the microphone. Just come on up and... If I knew what that meant.
I'm shy. Dan Other, Missouri S&T. So a question which I'd be fine for any of you to address, but in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals. I heard a lot of things that would probably apply even more so to, let's say, a rural village in the middle of somewhere Africa, right? So what are you doing to bring all of those Gates Foundation-y sponsored kind of best practices? You know, like for instance, Beth, I heard yours saying like, well, they don't have internet access. Well, they set up wide area network, local servers in some of these villages in sub-Saharan Africa, and then let the community use those. So I'm just curious, what's our feeding of technology and best practices going from where folks are addressing the SDGs in other resource-limited places, and how are we leveraging and using those here?
Well, I'll start with my my other research stream. So in addition to researching schools in the US and helping them become more globally competent, I also do global education in that I do research around the world. So when I do my research in Kenya, which is a sub-Saharan African country, and we find that there are technology challenges and no internet, no computers, the creativity is what we have to do. And so helping develop creative thinking is, I think, part of the sustainable development goals that the humanities can bring. Helping teachers think creatively about teaching in new ways. So when you deliver teaching, and this is a little tangential to your question, but when you deliver teaching with the lecture, what we call the sage on the stage, where I'm the provider of information and I'm giving it to all of you, and you're working individually, then that means you all need a computer. But if we are creative and we think about teaching in new ways, like group work, like STEM challenges, then we are teaching, we're not only being creative as teachers, but we're teaching students creativity, and that creativity can then translate into solutions to some of the sustainable development goals. So helping students here in the United States as well as in other countries think about STEM and design and solutions, coming up with their own solutions. But as far as using what's happening in other countries and bringing it here, I think that there aren't enough resources yet to go around. I mean, I don't think that that there's enough technology or enough bandwidth yet to go around.
Well, like where I was going with that question is, for instance, the fact that all of us do so much internet banking on our phones now is specifically because they developed that first in countries where they didn't have real banks. In other words, when you don't have a real bank, your only choice is to go with your phone. So you could do banking in India or sub-Saharan Africa 15 years ago that is much better than the banking we currently have on our phone. So it's amazing to think about what people do in resource-limited environments that doesn't just kind of find ways to do our stuff with less resources, but just jettisons our old-fashioned ways and looks for entirely new paradigms of how to do things. So that's kind of where I was pushing that. So
yeah, and I think that when there's a need or a challenge or a problem, then that's where you bring your creative juices to the table in order to solve it. And so we might not recognize a problem here, like we don't recognize it as a need yet. And in other places, they do have it as a need. And I think one of the things that is really interesting moving forward are international collaborations. And so then students are learning from each other of what's happening in other countries.
Just to offer some perspective, the banking is a great example, but so in a small rural community in Missouri with one bank, internet banking is a threat to that neighborhood bank that has been there for 100 years or more. So just to offer a little bit perspective, we think of that access as a good thing, but that's not always the attitude in those communities, and for good reason too. I think the same thing about college, and we tend to think like, why wouldn't those families want their kids to go to college? Truth is, if they go to college, they're not coming back. There's no jobs for them to come back to, except maybe teaching, maybe. So convincing those families to send their kid away means that they're not coming back, and there may not be anyone to take care of them. That's part of what they're thinking about. So some of it here is the attitude is just different, and I think we need to understand that and sort of respect that and think about how to approach that when we work with these communities.
Hi, I'm Annie Vandermoss from the College of Nursing here in Umsel. And I came in a little bit late, just as Dr. Bumbo was speaking, and that was intriguing to me because you were talking about community chats. And we in the College of Nursing do a lot of work in the community, clinically, and also we have some research that we've begun. Dr. Grigsby spoke at one of these events about her research. What I'm thinking about lately is the challenge of using that incredibly rich data set and moving it into interventions and more focused and sustained kinds of activities that give back to the community. In other words, you know, there are a lot of methodologies in terms of how to do that, you know, and develop the next steps in a research process. But over the years, I've done that kind of work, and that is my biggest challenge, is taking the data to the next step, to the generalizable step, and to that working environment, that translational implementation science. So I want to speak with you at lunch, and that's why I'm up here, and anybody else who has wants to engage in some conversations about that, because we have so many people here in the college, on this campus alone, that do this kind of work. And I think that interdisciplinary involvement is really what we need to make some real inroads based on our university's talent.
Definitely, and just to build on that, so through the literature review I was working on, nursing is one of the fields that has explored these community conversations the most and engaged communities the most in this work. And you're right, sustainability is one of the biggest issues with community change efforts. I've learned that the hard way through going in. You feel like you show up and you're going to do something really great, and you kind of just stir the pot, and then you leave them to pick up the pieces, and you got everyone motivated and you weren't there to support them through. And that's why in the last couple of years I've been doing a lot more long-term sustainable change efforts, which requires a lot more effort and a lot more on-the-ground work. But I've definitely come up with some good solutions and strategies, not necessarily solutions, I'd say strategies, to addressing some of those sustainability issues. So I look forward to that lunch chat.
I'd like to thank Annie for getting the reason behind these research summits and beginning the conversation. Are there any other questions for our panel? If there are not, I'd really like to thank them again. This was a wonderful session. I'd like to point out that all of the people that just spoke are probably, no more than 2 years at UMSL, so... No, it isn't. With one exception. I've seen Amber speak a number of times, actually, so I should have recognized that, and she's always enthusiastic. That was a save. Okay, on with the next session. Our first speaker of this session is, can I get my glasses? Daniel Earther, and Professor of Civil, Environmental, and Architectural Engineering at Missouri S&T.
The giant green button in the middle. All right, so for those of you that are not really good at Twitter, then step up and get good at it, because I've got my slides on Twitter, so I would encourage you to get out your devices and follow me in real time. I've got these slides pinned to my profile at Daniel Oather, so please make sure you're following along. I've embedded some links in there, including links, hyperlinks through to relevant research and papers that we've published. So there's a whole lot of discussion that can go on there in addition to here, so please do go look at Daniel Oather on Twitter. If you're like, hey, I don't do Twitter, that's okay. You can actually don't have to be a member of Twitter to see other people's Twitter accounts. It's a microblog, right? In other words, I'm publishing it. You don't have to be a member of Twitter to follow me or be interested in reading. So please go check this out. So what I'm going to talk about today is a program that I have called GROWS. Global Research on Water, Sanitation, and Hygiene to Eliminate Childhood Stunting. This is related to Sustainable Development Goal 2, which is hunger, and 6, which is about water. Dirty water, unclean food, leads to what we call systemic inflammation in the gut. What you and I put in our mouth is not going into our body. This tube that starts here and ends here is actually the outside world. It's just a special version of the outside world. To get inside our body, it's got to go across our intestine. We've got to bring it into our body to be nourished, to have nutrition. And so if we've got inflammation in our intestines, we don't pick up that nourishment. Doesn't matter how much food I shove in somebody's mouth, if they can't pick up that nutrition across their intestine, I haven't fed them. And so in many countries, because there is dirty water and unclean food leading to the systemic inflammation, this results in something that's called poor nutrition contributing to stunting. Stunting is the phenomenon of not growing to your genetic capacity. It doesn't mean that everybody small is stunted. It doesn't mean that everybody's tall is not stunted. There's different genetic variations of height. But stunting is when you're not reaching your genetic potential because you received poor nutrition. And this means 2 standard deviations below the World Health Organization means for your height. So this is a picture of kids that are supposedly 9 years old. That yellow line in the back is how tall they should be at 9 years old. These are all kids that are 9 years old. So the problem is because they have unclean food and unclean water, they have unhealthy intestines, which is causing them to be stunted. Now, why is this a concern? Now, we can look around the world at stunting. We can see, okay, sub-Saharan Africa, shown here in pink, lots of stunting. We can look at the subcontinent, India. We can look at Southeast Asia, stunting. People aren't getting proper nutrition. So this is a UNICEF map. So this is where the 150 million people are distributed around the world. But if you have good eyesight, you'll notice there's one purple area in the Western Hemisphere. That's the country of Guatemala. It's the 6th most stunted country in the world, and in the western highlands of Guatemala, where the indigenous people live, speaking Mayan language, still doing many of their religious practices, there's more than 70% of that community that's stunted. Now you may think, like, why does that matter? Why should somebody in Missouri be working on this problem? Well, here's the deal. In the western highlands of Guatemala, because of post-colonial abuses, right? When you and I think Guatemala, we think, oh, they speak Spanish. They don't. They don't. The conquerors speak Spanish. The people in Guatemala speak Mayan dialect. The conquerors speak Spanish. So picking up Spanish is actually picking up the language of the conqueror. So going in and trashing their traditional views and saying, well, here's Western ways to deal with this, this is actually very, very detrimental to cultures that have been around for thousands of years. And here's the deal. Because of bad weather, because of climate change, El Nino and La Nina events, because their crops have coffee rust, and because their corn has aflatoxin on it, a fungus from aspergillus, people move from the farms to the cities. And in the cities, there's crime. And because there's crime, they go north. Our national security issue on our southern border is because we are not helping the people in Guatemala be able to stay on their farms. I am solving a U.S. national security crisis by addressing stunting. So whether we're going to spend the money on fences, or whether we're going to spend the money on helping people get proper nutrition in Guatemala, I'm solving that same problem. I would pose to you, independent of your political persuasion, that helping people stay in their homes is probably a good idea, and probably a reasonable way to spend our money. And so addressing stunting is significant. Now, what does this look like? Now, I'm an engineer, but I know to go talk to other people when I want to do something important, right? So convergence research involves working with others. I work with nurses on community-based participatory research. I intervene during the first 1,000 days of life. And President Choi, before you take off, I wanted to show thank you to some folks that have been supported, including President Choi. I received the President's Intercultural Engagement Award last year and the Ratcha Fellowship this past year. He's a fantastic supporter of these kinds of initiatives, and I'm looking forward to chatting further with people at lunch. Thank you so much.
Okay, our next speaker is Paul Nam, Associate Professor of Chemistry at Missouri S&T. Now we're in my area of science.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to present our research work on biomass conversion technology for sustainable bioenergy and bioproducts. The Department of Energy have a using top it's a title. It's a biomass program with a mission to develop and transform our renewable and abundant biomass resources into commercially viable and high-performance biofuels, bioproducts, and also biopowers. The goals are to reduce dependence on foreign oil and then also promote the use of domestic sustainable energy sources, and also advance the bioindustry and stimulate economic growth, and also reduce carbon emissions. Biomass is a leading renewable resources that can provide drop-in fuel replacement, utilizing existing infrastructure for the transportation purposes. More than 1 billion tons of sustainable biomass could be produced in the United States, which can obviously provide for again, transportation fuel or make chemicals, or provide biopower. And also high-value chemicals and products to be produced along with the biofuels and to be more economical. And currently the biomass used to produce biofuel commercially are soybean and corn. However, soybean and corn are food and feed, so it's not sustainable as a feedstock for the biofuel or bioproduct production. So we have looked at microalgae as an alternative feedstock for the biofuel production. So these are some of the native microalgae we found in Missouri, and its lipid contents. As you can see, again, these microalgae are known to have a quite high lipid, which can be converted to biodiesel fuel, and also can convert the carbohydrate content into, through fermentation, to ethanol. So we selected one of the strain from here with a high lipid content, and then we cultivated this strain in a large pool using also flue gas from a coal-firing power plant. And this allowed rapid growth of this microalgae strain and produced a large amount of those algae, that's a biomass, which then extract the oil and convert it to the biodiesel, as you see in the slide. Now the conversion of this algae biomass into biodiesel will require a transesterification process, and this is conventionally done with acid or base catalyst. However, we've developed a transesterification process that do not require a catalyst, and by using a supercritical methanol. Methanol is one of the reagents used for the transesterification. However, if we heat the methanol above the critical temperature and pressurize above this critical pressure, it becomes a supercritical state, which have a number of advantages as a solvent and also as a reactant. It has a low dielectric constant, polarity, which then allows as a good mixing with the oil that we're trying to transestify. And also there's a high mass transfer to high diffusivity, and also you can control the reaction rates and yields and selectivity. And you can see on the right side, the soybean oil is transestify using the supercritical methanol, and all you have to do is just let it, after reaction settle, and then just distill off the methanol to be used for the transesterification process again, by the very clean the biodiesel produced. Also, the carbohydrate content of this microalgae also could be converted to ethanol. So in this case, we developed a process where before the fermentation, you have to pre-treat those cellulose components. And we utilize a carbonic acid instead of the conventional mineral acid, which carbonic acid can be produced through just pressurized carbon dioxide. And this will be alternative to this conventional mineral acid, which is very corrosive and which require also the subsequent removal process or neutralization process. With the carbonic acid, all you have to do is just decompress the vessel, and then CO2 is just removed, and then you have the product that's ready for the fermentation. So with this carbonic acid pre-treatment of the algae or the cellulose material, you can see a good glucose conversion from the cellulose, and you can see also comparing on the left side, left bottom, the blue bar graphs are conventional mineral acid-based treatment. But on the right, you can the blue shows that the carbon dioxide can definitely convert, and you can see also the produce ethanol from this algae stream. So in the overall, then with those different, my project, we start with this different innovative biochemical and thermochemical conversion process. We can then have an integrated algae production with the biorefinery, where we can then utilize also byproduct of each process back into the different or other part of this biorefinery. So this could be a sustainable process for producing the microalgae biomass, and then convert that to biofuels, and also biofuels also can be converted to bioplastic, which we, due to the time limit, I cannot talk about. But, so these are some of the things that we are working on at MSNT. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Jong Yoon Park, Assistant Professor of Mechanical and Aerospace and Engineering at Missouri S&T.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So let me start my talk by asking one question. How many of you have lithium-ion batteries? How many of you have lithium-ion batteries? All of you. I think all of you have lithium-ion battery in your pocket. So today I'm going to talk about that energy storage system, in particular the lithium-ion batteries. Okay, so I believe all of us here knows the need of the clean energy. Am I right? And then there, the role of the energy storage is very important. However, the current technology cannot fully satisfy the demand from the market in terms of power, energy, and safety, and some like a cost, and also the charging time. So that's why we need advanced energy storage system. And this shows my today's message. So to achieve that goal, we have to think about the several aspects simultaneously in terms of the material, structure, and some management. So definitely we need some good material, right, enabling the high power and the high energy density. And also with the same material, depending on how they are assembled, the performance can be changed significantly. And also same materials, same structures, that means the same batteries, but depending on how it is used, then the battery performance can be changed significantly. So today I'm just briefly show some examples of my ongoing research effort by focusing on the three aspects. The first one is the material aspect, in particular the interface controls. So coating is very important technology to improve the material property, and this is a collaboration with Dr. Liang, who will present next time. So we found ALD coating, very thin coating, can improve the battery performance significantly. But we found several interesting phenomena relevant to the ALD coatings. The first one, there is optimal the thickness. So above a certain thickness, the coating is not very effective. And we found there is a competition between the bulk and the surface diffusions, and that surface diffusion is dominant at the thin thickness, but as the thickness increased, the bulk diffusion is important. And also we found some atomic structures plays a role, and amorphous and the crystallinity, their competition determine the transport property. And also we found that the mechanics, the ALD coating can stabilize the mechanical aspect, but it's not protection itself. So increase the conductivity result in less concentration gradient inside the materials that cause less stress. And another interesting thing we found is, depending on your material, sometimes despite the coat, the material inside can be dissolved further. So it was quite unexpected result. And we found the mechanism that is related to your the charge state and the atomic distance. And this is interpretation about the electrode level. So in the electrode level, particles agglomerate, and that bothers lithium intercalation, so we cannot fully utilize the particles. So here, the ALD coating can play like a highway, so you can easily distribute to the materials. So this is another example of the material aspect. Nanofiber is a good candidate for the energy storage because it provides like a high surface area and it provides the flexibility. So we developed technology that can easily integrate the nanofiber and the particles. So the first figure shows we are embedding nickel, then nickel can improve the conductivity and also can play as a catalyst. So if you sense here, the blue line is our technology. It shows much better. And this is another example using the combining of the powder and the fibers. So in this case, we are trying to utilize the lead. So lead is a good candidate, and by combining the fiber, we achieve a very good performance. And this is a structural aspect. So one challenge of the energy storage is increasing area capacity. So to increase the area capacity, we have to increase thickness or pack density, but then limit the transport properties. So we propose multi-scale controlled. So in the 3D printing, we make a 3D geometry, then it decreases your distance between the anode and the cathode. And in the second part, we are using the self-assembly process, and they organize the particles and improve the performance. So we demonstrate that this multi-scale control is improving significantly than other cases. And also we are extending this idea to the aerogel depth printing, so we can make more complex geometry and also combining ALD process. And this is the last slide. So the first shows that we develop new charging algorithm. So same battery, depending on how it is charged, the battery behavior changes significantly. So this is demonstration of the importance of the battery management system. And to do that, we need to know internal status of battery. But battery keep changing because of degradation from mechanical, chemical, electrochemical, and the thermals. So we developed a model that can capture all the physics and it can predict the degradation accurately. And this model can be used to state of charge, state of health estimations. Okay, that's it.
Thank you. Next talk is by Junhua Lian, Associate Professor of Chemical and Biochemical Engineering at Missouri S&T.
Thank you. Good morning. So next I will talk about a slightly different topic, but still focus on energy. Related to the first one, Dr. Nam's topic. So I will talk about how to use CO2 to convert CO2 to some value-added chemicals or fuels. So this slide shows that glowing energy source and currently for the composition of energy of source. And you can see for this one, for the left one, this shows in 2010. And the majority of our energy source is from coal power. This is about 56%. And also another majority part is from oil and natural gas. This is close to 15%. And in the next 15 years, and there will be more alternative energy, like for example, biomass. However, still, the gas power and the coal power and also oil, this is the main source of power, energy. And so for the coal and gas and also oil, one of the product or byproduct is CO2, carbon dioxide. So as we know, CO2 is one of the major greenhouse gas. Like though CH4 methane, this is also very important, very significant. See, methane is mainly from natural gas. Like in terms of the greenhouse effect, methane is about 30 times of CO2. But CO2 have a large amount. So therefore, here you can see so this one just shows the amount of CO2 emission over years. This is steadily increased. So now the question is, So on one side, so we need more energy, right? And we need to use more coal. On the other side, there's a lot of CO2 produced. The question is, can we use CO2 or convert CO2 to some value-added chemicals or some fuels? So this is a topic I want to focus today. And so for CO2 utilization is one solution, for that. And there's a lot of utilization for CO2. Like one is Dr. Nam mentioned just now is like for so related to some algae, right? So convert use CO2 for some plants. And this is one approach. Another approach is I want to focus here today is how can we convert CO2 to some chemicals, like especially for fuels. And then we can use, like for here is one example is CO2 hydrogenation. CO2 react with hydrogen to form methanol. And then we can further convert the methanol to dimethyl ether or DME. And then we can use this DME as a fuel. And so, later, though maybe, still have CO2 emission from this fuel, but this is a closed carbon cycle, much better just like burn carbon, right? Burn coal. So my research is focused on, current research is focused on this one, how to use CO2 to produce chemicals. And so just now I mentioned dimethyl ether or DME, and use DME, there's a lot of advantage. So they have a high setting number, like close to gasoline, and also high efficient combustion, and sulfur-free property, and low emission of NOx and carbon monoxide. Basically, this is kind of much more environmentally friendly process. The question is how to produce that. So we are chemical engineer, right? So with this, we'll go through the chemical reaction process. So typically, there will be two steps. One is CO2 react with hydrogen, normally based on a copper-based catalyst to form methanol. And during this process, there's a lot of water as a byproduct produced. So in the second step is methanol will do hydrogenation, also use some catalyst like zeolite, some like aluminum oxide, and they will form dimethyl ether. During this process also there's a lot of water produced, so this is not good. And what we plan to do is we will combine two steps in one reactor, used called bifunctional catalyst. Basically, so this will use modular reactor. We will simplify the process, and so the second reaction will consume methanol, the product of the first reaction, right? Based on the chemical equilibrium, this will push the reaction further from left to right. Basically, we can increase the conversion of carbon dioxide. But this process, there's also some limitation because there's water produced. Water is not good for the catalyst. And also, there's some side reaction, like here mentioned, reverse water gas shift reaction. There will be more water produced. So therefore, in my research, we try to design some new catalyst, have much better thermal stability and better activity. And also, we plan to design membrane reactor. During the reaction process, we will remove water. Okay, so inclusion, CO2 utilization is to chemical and production promising process, but there's still a lot of challenge. And this is the reason, so we are working on this. Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Charlie Clymer, Assistant Professor of Math and Computer Science at the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Hello. So data, it seems like it's everywhere these days. I chose this topic because I thought maybe some of you are struggling with some data problems in your own specific domains, and maybe you might find this of interest. So can you guys see that? That's a dot-to-dot puzzle. Doesn't show up too well, does it? It has dots with little numbers. How many of you worked a dot-to-dot puzzle when you were a kid? Pretty much everybody? Yeah. So what do you think this one is? Any guesses? I was kind of thinking there was a dinosaur tail up here in the upper right-hand corner. I don't know. But as it turns out, it's a bird in a nest with its babies. So the problem is with our data, sometimes it just looks like a big, huge pile of data points, and unfortunately, we don't have the little numbers to follow to try to find meaningful information that's hidden in that data. Some of the relationships in our data are simple and easy to find, such as like Huntington's disease is caused by a single genetic mutation. So researchers looking at cases with Huntington's disease, their genetic data and controls could easily find this pattern. But a lot of problems are really complex, and including for complex diseases, we have multiple genetic markers working together, kind of synergistically a lot of times, to create that trait. And in all kinds of domains, there's like multiple factors that work together, and so it makes it more difficult to find these patterns. You can't just examine every single possible pattern because of the computational demands. There's just an explosion of the number of patterns that you could have. Another problem is that a lot of fields have problems with heterogeneity. I say that word a million times and now I'm stumbling on it. Heterogeneity. And heterogeneity is when there's subgroups that have the same trait that's caused by different pattern of factors. So for instance, it could be different patterns of weather conditions that would lead to the formation of a funnel cloud, or different patterns of genetic markers that lead to the risk for a disease such as Alzheimer's or cancer or other diseases. So these problems are really tough, and it's hard to find the meaningful information in the data. One approach is to use a network model. So this is a Facebook network. I don't know if any of you have ever seen this before, but what this is, it shows for each node, each dot on this network is an individual's friend on Facebook. So the individual who posted this. And an edge is placed between two dots if those two individuals happen to be friends on Facebook. And what you see arises, you'd expect it. His friends at high school, they're friends with each other on Facebook, so there's a nice big cluster of people that went to that high school together at that time. And the really cool thing about a network model is that you're finding a pairwise relationship, just who's friends with each other on Facebook, and you're able to pull out this very high-dimensional relationship, 30-something odd people that all went to school together without even knowing where they went to school. And so you're able to extract useful information from your data with just pairwise relationships. So there's 3 steps. You need to compute your pairwise correlations and identify the clusters, and then you need to test each of those clusters to see if they're associated with whatever property that you're looking for. One problem is that traditional correlation measures can't deal with heterogeneity. So here's an example where we have 2 genetic markers, SNP1 and SNP2, for 10 individuals, and you see that the first 5 individuals are totally correlated. They have exactly the same genetic markers at both locations, whereas the other 5 individuals are not correlated at all. And so what happens is, when you have heterogeneity, you could expect this. If those first 5 individuals had one pattern that was giving them risk for Alzheimer's disease, and the others had a different pattern, you wouldn't expect them to be correlated, those genetic markers. But when you take a correlation measure, you have just a single numeric value that you compute, and the problem is it has to account for all the individuals that aren't correlated in that single value. So our approach for this is to have this custom correlation coefficient, which instead of providing just one value, provides multiple values that each quantifies a very simple measure, and each value quantifies the different type of relationship. And so it doesn't get all watered down by the uncorrelated data. It also provides extra information so you can expand your network and reduce the false positive signals. So using this method, we found this really cool, interesting pattern on chromosome 14 that we don't know why it's there. Large pattern. We also found, we've identified and replicated a genetic pattern associated with psoriasis. And we found patterns that were associated with hypertensive heart disease, and a pattern between vitamin D receptor and skin color genes. My time is out. we're also looking at potatoes right now. It's lightning fast. It is actually the fastest computation on the face of the earth. We've held this record for a year and a half. We broke the scale barrier. And we're moving forward. We've expanded this to real value data, which might be of interest to some of you who don't work with genetic data, but work with real values. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Charlie. Okay, the final talk today is from Carolyn Davies, Associate Professor, Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences at UMKC.
Good morning. I'm very excited to share with you some research that I feel is addressing the biggest issue of the globe, which is climate disruption, and doing it through sustainability. And as you know, this is going to be the challenge for our students. And this is not a topic that is addressed universally across the United States or here in the Midwest. So I do this through teaching an environmental sustainability course that has student-engaged research projects in the community. We are addressing these sustainability goals, and this is a gen ed class, so these are non-majors, and most of them have no idea what these are and what their source is. We even have to introduce the UN. So in this class, I teach a number of these courses, and they are scaffolded in the scale of the projects, but today I'm going to talk about this is a gen ed class, large format, so 100, 120 students in each class. They each do an individual community engagement project that they design and implement in the community. And so you deal with them where they're at. They all want to do group projects. They can't do group projects. They have to go out into the community of their choice that they identify and develop the project there. So they get excited about these projects. Initially, they're not so thrilled. They thought this was a gen ed class and they could just sit there throughout the semester. And then they find out they have to do this project. And it's very scary. And I tell them that this is probably the only course where you can fail your major project and still get a good grade. Because in fact, the students whose projects fail, they often learn more about the barriers to sustainability in the community than those students whose projects went swimmingly. So the goals for this course are to, in terms of sustainability, exposure to the concepts of sustainability, which starts with global change and why it's happening, the physics and the science behind climate change, the Sustainability Development Goals. It emphasizes the intersection of geosciences and social challenges. It's a highly multidisciplinary course, and you'll see that. Experience with hands-on and community engagement, which we all know through research is a very powerful way to get our students involved and excited about their projects. Developing scientific communication. They're not science majors, but by the end of this, they need to communicate the science to the community that they're working on. And then developing change agent skills. None of them come to this class thinking they're going to be or want to be a change agent, but they actually do this through the process of the course. So before I go further, I want to thank these faculty who helped develop this over the years, Mike Frisch and Jake Wagner from Urban Planning, Dan Dermetzel. We co-taught this for a long time, and we've had so many guest speakers. This is just a small selection of what we have in Kansas City for high expertise. And you can find this expertise wherever you are. We happen to have a wonderful Office of Environmental Quality for Kansas City, the Water Department, Kansas City Food Circle. We have Bob Berkevile from BNIM Architecture. This is the #1 sustainability architecture firm in the country, so he is often a mentor and makes himself available. Kansas City Power and Light, Metropolitan Energy Center, so they're exposed to lots of aspects of sustainability throughout the semester while they're doing their project. We also have other faculty from UMKC, from psychology, history, engineering, sociology, Extension, talking about health disparities, concrete research, which is actually amazing, and consumption, and the link to happiness, a wide range of topics that support understanding of sustainability. And we have a number of activities. It's hard to do these activities with a large class, but we do them. So this is the final end of the project. We have a symposium, and the students produce a research poster. They've had to go out and engage their community, conduct research, collect data, analyze it, and propose a solution. The solutions don't always get done, but we have had almost 600 projects across Kansas City at this point. And last year's class, if you add up the monetary savings for all these projects, for this class was $76,000. So and we aren't able to collect monetary data on all the projects, but over the years, on average, it's about $70,000 to $100,000 per class, all of these projects in savings, some of which are for UMKC. One student did an analysis of a building and showed the university that they could save $17,000 annually in making the changes to the lighting. And after presenting for our class, she presented it to the Vice Chancellor of Facilities, and they've already done it. A student from one of our students worked at Rockhurst University. He did a similar and showed them that they could save $36,000 with their building. So these are, I've got to stop, but I just want to show you, there's so many stories on all these projects, and we'll save that for lunch. These are some of the comments the students have about the impact of this class. So it's one student, one project at a time, but each student creates a huge ripple in their little communities. The range of topics is amazing on these projects, from converting food trucks to energy. And so of those 600, I'd be happy to share a number of these stories with you. Thank you.
So if I can have the speakers come back up, I think I have enough chairs now. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, please use the microphone in the middle aisle.
So, Kwame Warfare from Missouri S&T Mining Engineering. And I don't know who in particular, maybe Daniel, you would be the best person to answer my question. But referring back to, I don't know how many people have seen it, but the World Bank put out a report recently on the growing role of minerals and materials in the renewable energy space. And it has huge estimates of how much metals and minerals that need to be mined in order to produce the renewable energy technologies if you're going to switch to a low carbon future, right? When I first saw the report, I was at a workshop in Golden, Colorado, where the World Bank was presenting this doom and gloom. Mines need to be exploring these metals, whether it's lithium or cobalt or all these things, to switch to renewable energy. And I think it was a day after I got back to Rolla, I got on the plane the next day to go to Canada, to the largest conference on mineral exploration. And all the talk there was no money to do exploration. Okay, so we have on one hand this picture that you need all these minerals to support this change, make our climate, to solve our climate issue. And one, not only are exploration dollars down, but the exploration dollars that are coming in are all going to gold because gold prices are up, right? And nobody's doing anything on these material needs. So to me, there's a policy angle to this, and some of us on S&T campus have been talking about that. But if you do make this switch, it would be on the back of local communities, predominantly, and again, the World Bank report points out there's a lot of potential in developing countries for some of these things. A good example for this discussion is cobalt. Right now, more than 50% of cobalt production comes from the DRC, and there's a lot of suspicion that you have child labor involved in producing that cobalt that goes into the batteries that you're using and the technology we are playing with. And while you have some big players in the cobalt market, I would guess if you don't solve this certainty, so going back to your research on the technology, if you don't solve the issue on what's going to be in those batteries so that the industry can actually try to plan for it, you're going to get a sudden spike in the demand for these things. And most likely it's going to be the informal, artisanal, illegal miners that are going to be the one with the most elastic capacity to fill that. And maybe you would see, so it's not stunting alone, it's education outcomes, it's water, clean water issues, all those issues on the Sustainable Development Goals. You're going to see that while you're solving the climate change problems, locally communities are going to be suffering from the impact of the mineral extraction necessary to do that. So, I mean, that's a long, loaded question, but anybody?
It's a great question. It's very relevant. And in my own travels and experience, I think what I'm seeing more, so let's say we wind back 300-400 years and we think about Europeans and colonization and extraction of wealth and the accumulation of that in Europe and then what that meant, right? I mean, and so I always refer to this as the ovarian lottery. We look around and we think we've done something good in our own education. It's just we were born in a particular place in a particular time and just did the natural thing of go to school for many of us in this room. And so it's not, we don't have a whole lot to brag about in terms of our own accomplishments. The thing that makes this perhaps even more insidious, in my view, in this particular issue has actually been the way particularly Chinese government officials have been using, essentially mimicking the World Bank, USAID, DFID kind of financing for development approach to essentially do projects in other countries, but rather than kind of the with guilt, the way the West has done their projects for a while, a lot of these projects have been done with the long-term view of land tenure rights and China essentially accumulating land tenure rights and mineral rights and water rights for the project that they built up. So we actually face a much worse doom and gloom scenario than the current essentially wealth inequity that we've created through colonization based on the current kind of approach that China is doing, right? And so, I mean, I'm not saying this to I'm not trying to malign if anybody here is a Chinese national, I'm not trying to, but I mean, the Chinese government is doing a much more elegant job of grabbing up rights to these things than the West ever did through our colonization. So and I'm not, yeah, I think so. You wouldn't agree here?
Well, I'm saying that when we colonized, we killed people.
Yeah. I would say it's worse than that because they're actually, because this is actually, they're essentially using the West's own system against themselves. So this is a rule of law approach to land tenure and mineral tenure rights. So in other words, we'd essentially have to blow up our own rule of law if we wanted to change the system that will be in place to subjugate people in the future. And of course the West has had to do that. I mean, that's the issue of slavery was clearly blowing up our own rule of law. And so, I don't know, but that would be, I don't know if that's, I don't mean to be gloom and doom, but when I hear your issue, I think it's even worse maybe than what we've seen up to this point.
The question I'm trying to raise is, whilst we play, and I really like your presentations, while we play with battery storage architectures and all these things, let's not forget that on the back of that, if we're going to solve these issues, those materials have to come from somewhere. And more, the problem is we are using more and more of the elements on the periodic table to make our technology more efficient. And those are things we haven't, as a mining engineer, we haven't traditionally mined. This is why you see the issue of critical minerals a lot. So I can go to tellurium is another example. Most mining companies know exactly where the tellurium is in their circuits. It's not worth anything to them. If you take the traditional copper mine, they're producing billions of dollars of copper, maybe millions of dollars of gold, and then the silver is there. The tellurium is in the order of hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's just a nuisance. So we throw it away. Okay, now you need it because you need it in your photovoltaics, but you don't have any policy effort to make it attractive for the mines to extract it. But even if you did, and that goes back to some of these, even if you did, how do we do that in a sustainable way where solving climate change doesn't result in child labor and bad water and stunting. I think that's the question, and what can our system do in collaborative research to try and solve these problems?
So if I add some comment here, so we are engineers, right? So I mean, some of us are engineers, and we are trying to solve the social problems, and also our most important driving force is not technology, I think, it's like cost. So in terms of the battery area, so as you mentioned, the cobalt is very expensive material, so nowadays we're trying to avoid the cobalt, and we're trying to use the less expensive material as more common material. For instance, that example is the nickel. So trying to add more nickel and minimize the cobalt, so in that way you can solve that kind of problem. And also, as I mentioned in my presentation, we can solve that kind of problem not only material aspect. So we can consider how to effectively the limited resources material by engineering, like as I mentioned, how to assemble the materials and how to well operate the energy storage system. So that's what we are doing these days.
I think ideally, this probably won't happen. The ideal would be that there would be partnerships with those countries, and those countries would be the main operator, and we would make partnerships with them. But these days in development, it's driven by dollars, which is why China is there, and they're not really doing those partnerships. It's still very much extractive. So those host countries need to, in some way, take ownership and of the mineral rights and dictate the partnerships, but that's hard to do in an inverted, unequal system.
I actually have a question for you, Dr. Davies. You mentioned that your course helps students develop change agent skills. I'm particularly interested in that skill development process. Can you speak to how you're tracking and measuring that skill development beyond just task completion, and how that skill development process might better inform professions related to sustainability?
Okay. So far this course hasn't been doing quantitative research on the projects. Certainly going forward, we're going to do more pre and post analyses of the student research itself. They are stepped through this project because most of them have had no experience whatsoever. So each week they have to submit a portion of the project. And so it's done in pieces. So by the time they get to the end of the semester, their project is essentially done. It's not, oh, spring break, I'm going to crank out this project. You have to be doing it throughout the entire semester. So that kind of tracking and feedback to the students is how we measure this. And then the total goal at the end is the completion, but it's the stepwise completion too throughout the semester. And that involves a lot of one-on-one. It's almost like doing 100 individual projects, but it can be scaled, and I think it's a skill that can be upscaled in a large way. And in fact, we're now working with 2 dual credit high schools who participate in this, so there's no reason that the rural high schools, all these schools, this is something that could be done in every university and high school. And one of the underlying agendas that isn't explicit in the course is that awareness of climate disruption and what you can do about it in your own backyard. And while you're not going to save the planet with one project, it's mainly about awareness and growing awareness. And that we capture in the evaluations at the end, students' qualitative comments about the impact of the project on them and the community that they were working with.
Are there any additional questions? Okay, if we can thank the panel again for their wonderful lectures. I believe lunch is ready. So if you'd like to go and line up, grab your lunch. Please talk about what you've heard this morning, ask additional questions, and try to network. Thank you.